All right, hi everyone. I think most people are back from lunch, so let's carry on because I know everyone's got lots of questions and things to ask and discuss, and we've got a few talks on our Range X project, and then we'll get into really the meat of what a policy and practice workshop is about. So, all right. So this next session is on the Range X project that the Afro-Montane Research Unit has been part of for the last 4 years as part of a global consortium. And it really speaks to a lot of these range expanding species challenges in our context, both non-native and native. And I'm going to give the first talk, just a little bit of an overview. Um, Let me just find the click thing. Sorry. So I'm just going to give an overview. It's a non-sciencey overview, and then some of the other team members will give the sciencey parts of it. And then if Grant behaves himself, we'll let him do his rosacea talk after that, which fits in very well um, with that whole thing as well. So, all right. So let me just figure out how this works. Okay, my fingers are better than Kim's, so it's good. Okay, so the Mountain Invasion Research Network is a global network of academics who are interested in what non-native species are doing in mountains around the world. It's quite a prestigious network of people. It's more kind of a people network than an organizational network, and it's very much a passion-driven network, which often makes these things work better than if it's just organizational itself. So it's a really great group of people. It's very collegial, and they've done really amazing work on mountains all over the world with global syntheses and looking at global trends, which is quite nice because so many of the mountain work in the mountain groups are very northern hemisphere biased. So this is actually one of the only mountain groups that really is truly global in terms of data, in terms of implications of data. So we're enjoying being part of that. And yeah, I've got Kim Finger now. Um, the Myron group is most well known for this roadside protocol. It's a T-shaped plot that is a standard rollout that's been implemented in roads that go up mountains, in other words, up elevation transects around the world. And it's looking at the disturbance impact along the roadside as well as um, into the native vegetation away from the road to see how far away native species, non-native species are actually infiltrating mountainscapes away from roads. It's obviously biased towards mountains that have significant road infrastructure in them, like Europe or North America or parts of South America. We don't really have that many roads, for instance, in comparison, that are big tarred paved roads like that through high mountains. But it's a very useful protocol nevertheless, and there's also a trail version which we find very helpful, particularly in a place like the Drakensberg, where trails are more significant for us because of what people might be carrying on their boots or what might be going up and down with other forms of traffic. So there's only two Myron protocols in Southern Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. There's one in the Atlas. I see. So Africa is very underrepresented in this, and we'd love to see more Myron protocols rolled out in African mountains. So if any of you are interested in becoming part of that, let us know. We've just put a new one up in the last couple of years at Witsieshoek in the Maluti Drakensberg from the entrance to Witsieshoek at about 2,000 meters all the way up to 3,000 meters. It's the first complete one in the Drakensberg, so we're quite excited by that. They also have a rock survey, which we are not involved in, but it looks very interesting. It's basically looking at what are non-native species doing on cliffs and cliff faces. And we do certainly have a little invasive or non-native, at least, plant community in our mountains that really prefers cliffs and caves. So on top of the berg, on top of the amphitheater, if you go to Crow's Nest Cave, there's a whole little group of non-native species. They're not invasive, but they really like their little niche in the cave there. Things like um, European stinging nettle and that kind of stuff. So, okay, then the third thing Myron is now known for is Range X, which is this global project. That's the Swiss site. The Swiss project is the mothership. So I used their pick. And we're going to just share a little bit about that. This is what Range X really is aiming to do, to understand the processes and impacts of why plants are expanding their ranges. Um, very much what we've heard this morning in a local context, regional context. Disentangle the direct effects of climate and other indirect effects, many of which we've mentioned this morning. Um, this knowledge can be used as a basis for developing policy. So we've heard a lot about policy this morning as well. And then we focus on mountain ecosystems as a model for all of these things. So mountains really are kind of a nice laboratory for all these components. Okay, so where's the RangeX consortium doing this project? It's an EU biodiversity funded project. And locally we're funded by the DSI NRF. But there's one in Argentina, there's a site here, there's various sites in Europe, one in Kashmir, and then one in China. So it's really quite a nice, for a 4-year project, it's really quite a nice geographic spread. We had one component in the US, but the data didn't really fit. So that one is not being included at this point. Kim, what are you doing to this thing? Yeah, so these are just some pictures of the task 1.1, which is really the glamour task and a whole lot of tasks, which I'll show you what they are just now. But the open top chambers in these landscapes is kind of quite sci-fi and space agey, and it makes for good pics. So there's some up in the tundra, in the Scandies, and the Swiss ones. I'm not actually sure where the top right one is from. Sorry, no, it's probably Norway. Yeah. Um, it's after the glaciers melted. And then this is where we've put ours up. So the orange cross is where we have our control near the lodge at Vitzi's Hook and then on top of the berg. And then the alien invasive clearing or the rosaceae management, which Lesego will talk a bit more about, is in the Clarence Conservancy on Grant's farm. The only reason we allow Grant to collaborate with the ARU is because he has a farm up the road, and it's easier to do work on his farm than get permits from sandparks. And then where are our sites in terms of the landscape? So for tasks 1.1, 1.2, 2.2, and 2.3, they're on top of the Drakensberg there, just to the west of the Sentinel. And then task 1.3 was in this Golden Gate Clarence Conservancy landscape where you can see the bush encroachment there on the mountain. Okay, so this is what our flagship task 1.1 looks like on top of the berg. This is at 3,100 meters. The biggest achievement of this project was that the stuff is still there 4 years later, despite the fact that we had 150-kilometer winds on top of the berg 2 weeks ago. And in 4 years, we've only lost 2 chambers. We don't know where they are. No, actually, we found them broken further away. So no hikers were killed by flying open-top chambers. And this is a little bit of it's protected by a bit of a ridge just above the Namahadi Pass here. Getting all of this up was very interesting. We flew it all up by helicopter. And it was quite an interesting logistical exercise. OTCs? No, we didn't. We flew them all. The timber was, yeah, the Alpine base was another story. Yeah, so that's the view, more or less. Sentinel Peak there in the background. So then I'm just going to share a little bit about Sorry, that's just another view. That's the Montesources ridge at the back there, the border with Lesotho's on top. Those are the camping mats drying out there after some unpleasant weather. Okay, so these are the tasks. The green ones are the ones that we have effectively got preliminary data for, and we've published one paper on task uh, 2.3, but Stephanie will talk about that. Um, but these, we have good preliminary data now after the 4 years. The red ones are ones that still need the global synthesis from all the experiment sites to be integrated into kind of big data. And then 4.1 is part of what we're doing today. It's part of a coordinated stakeholder engagement process at a local and a global level. Okay, then I'm just going to share a little bit about, as I said, the others will speak about the sciencey part. But this Range X has been a big breakthrough for us as the ARU because we've been able to leverage off a lot of other things from that. So DSI NRF through the Global Change program very kindly gave us some money to resurrect this alpine base. This is the old Namahadi border post. At the top of Namahadi Pass, the left is before, the right is after. And that's really exciting. We've overcome one major hurdle in terms of alpine studies by having this, and we've also got full-time security on top of the mountain, and that's really thanks to the relationship with Vitsishoek and the Patlokwa Traditional Authority and ETH Zurich being willing to really help us with some of those logistics costs. So what's significant about it is that it's at 3,069 meters above sea level. It's the highest hut in southern Africa. It's higher than Afriski, it's higher than Sethlabatebe, it's higher than Bakong. So it's pretty high, and it's the 21st highest mountain hut in Africa, from what I could work out from various sources. Then building on that, we've been able to start putting instrumentation up at that hut as well, other than Range X. So we have a transect of weather stations, which I'll show you one just now. But we've created this Montesources long-term social ecological research platform, which is transboundary into Lesotho. It's registered with DEIMS. We've been trying to get it registered with ILTA, but because it's transboundary, there's a bit of a process to go through still. We're working very closely with FTON, and FTON is very keen to use our alpine component just next to their KZN Northernberg landscape. They're right next to each other to fill in the alpine gaps that are much more difficult to do from the KZN side. So that will look like a new weather station shortly, and then some other instrumentation as well. So that's our top weather station. And there's one down at the car park, at Sentinel Car Park. There's another one at Vitsishoek Mountain Lodge and another one at Royal Natal. This is all funded by the US Embassy through a big program that we have with Appalachian State University. And just this last 2 weeks, this top one, we managed to get it onto the Wi-Fi at the Alpine base because the cell signal here is very patchy, and it's now feeding live data, and there's actually a web link you can go to and you can check the weather live on top of the Drakensberg at any time. With the big cold front we had 2 weeks ago, the wind chill went down to -20, and the wind hit 120 kilometers an hour before we temporarily lost communication. So we know so little about our alpine systems in the Maluti Drakensberg, and they're changing very rapidly through a whole number of drivers, warming, direct human influence, etc. And it's a bit of catch up, but now we have a platform to actually work in the alpine and get some good quality data and catch up with Christian Kerner, etc., etc. Okay, We've attracted quite a lot of international attention. So Ranger X actually attracted the plant functional traits course here in December, thanks to Pete LaRue from Tix, who really was the champion for that in South Africa. Um, and yeah, Pete's just been amazing in a whole lot of different ways, which I don't have time to go into now. But if you're still there and not having a sleep this afternoon after lunch, thanks. Um, but it brought a high quality team, including Brian Inquest from Arizona and a number of others. So we're looking forward to seeing all that Alpine data coming out. And they did a whole lot of experiments on elevation transects from Hook all the way up to the summit. Yeah, we also had some carbon flux measurements done by a guy from East Europe as part of the Swedish team. So we're also waiting to see that. Okay, then it's also building on the relationship with Sound. We have a candidate just about to submit a Saatchi Care application today or tomorrow that will be shared between the ARU and Sound. Leveraging on this landscape and the Cathedral Peak catchments and other Seon components and relationships. So we're really looking forward to seeing that. Yeah, and strengthening that community of practice and our relationship there. Okay, then coming to an end, I can't not advertise our mountain conference next year in March at Champagne Sports Resort. We had a really fantastic time in 2022. It's going to be a 3-year cycle of these conferences, and definitely this will be the next one. And really, the aim is to help build this community of practice for Southern African mountains, transboundary, transdisciplinary, policy practice, practitioner, science, and really fill in these gaps we've heard so much about this morning, and really put our mountains on the global stage. We are very, very poorly represented internationally. Africa does not feature well on most global mountain platforms. So that's a great opportunity to showcase Africa. So forget about GSSA 60. I mean, come to both. I have a proposition for GSSA to be represented at the mountain conference to promote GSSA 60 as well. So Justin, should I talk to you? Okay. And if I get 3 new members to join the society, I think I have 10 years of free membership. So, um, okay, so these are confirmed keynotes so far. Steve Boys is going to be our opening keynote. Mr. Madagascar, Steve Goodman is going to be one of our other keynotes. William, you can come and have a rigorous debate with him um, about openness, open habitats in Madagascar. And then Sissy Matela, everyone knows Sissy. She's like just the perfect example of passion-driven interventions, and she really bridges that nature society bridge very, very well. Okay, so I have to say some very appreciative thank yous to a lot of people. EU Biodiversa, obviously, for accepting our proposal um, and funding all our overseas partners, DSI in South Africa, NRF. Witsisuk Mountain Lodge is a fantastic partner. Um, Transfrontier Parks Destinations as well, which is the umbrella organization over that. BNQ Services really did incredible technical work for us to make Range X possible. They were willing to do things most other people wouldn't. Um, Berg Flying, Brett Tungray with the chopper, very patient with the kind of things we put in the chopper um, that most people wouldn't put in their car. Sorry. Yeah. Um, yeah, and just obviously the guys who are on the mountain. Um, we have 2 teams that alternate on a weekly basis, and they really do put up with interesting weather. Yeah, obviously UFS, GSSA for allowing us to take over the PPW today, and then our colleagues in the program, Range X, and then obviously today, particularly the South African team, and then Pete there, I've put you there as an honorary Range X member as well. So, okay, so now to the actual sciencey bit. Um, and it is Lesejo first, who's going to be talking about task 1.3. And one of the other outcomes of Range X is that Lesejo applied for a Swiss scholarship, and he has received a Swiss scholarship to do his PhD at ETH Zurich, Europe's top university, with our PI on Range X, Jake Alexander. So we're very excited for Lesejo. Well done. And he's going to come back every year with bags of chocolates.
Hi, Derek. Okay. Uh, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so for me, I'll be talking about the outcomes that we got from the management of the invasive rosacea species along the elevational gradient. Um, yeah, so as many have said today and during the week, we are seeing a lot of these native and non-native food species expanding their elevational gradients. And we know that this has many negative implications on our grasslands, like affecting our water systems, biodiversity, and other things. So we also know that different life forms require like different management strategies. So yeah, that's one of the aims of this research. I mean, this study. And then, as Ralph already mentioned, this study it's being replicated in different countries. So probably maybe later this or next year we'll show you how the results look from all the countries. So basically, for this study, I wanted to see what impact these rosacea species have on the environment, and we also wanted to see the recovery of our native vegetation after the removal of these rosacea species. And our study was in Eastern Free State in Clarence. And it's actually neighboring Golden Gate National Park, and it's neighboring Lesotho here. And our sites are differentiated by elevation. So one of our lower sites, it's actually Clifton Farm, which was around 1,700 meters above sea level. And then the middle side there is the Rods, which is around 1,800 meters above sea level. And the top side was Omaskra, which is around 1.9, 1,900 meters above sea level. So for what we did for the study, we had cleared, uncleared, and control plots, and then everything was at 5 by 5 meter in size, and we made sure that they're like a minimum of 5 meters away from each other. And then for this study, we targeted five invasive rosacea species in this region, and four they are non-native. They come from the Europe and Asia, and then one native encroaching tree, which is Leucocidia sericea, that Pete LaRue has already spoken much about it already. And this slide we just wanted to show you after removal. This is what it actually looks like. And for the wood that we have removed, we actually packed it up in the baggie, and then we donated to the farm workers so that they can sell it in the Clarence Rurals. Yeah, and one of the questions is elevation a relevant issue in invasive species? And for grasses, yes, it is a relevant issue because it affects grass cover differently along elevation. As you can see, Okay, but yeah, as you can see at the top and middle side, there's a huge difference between invaded and uninvaded treatments. And then you can also see with your site regressions that you see a huge difference between low, middle, and top side. And for our FOB cover, we didn't see much significant difference in invaded and uninvaded treatments along elevational gradient. And also for even in site regression, we didn't find so much difference in FOB curve. And then with management, so here it's after we have removed, and then in the study, I was monitoring every season. So every 3 months back, I was going back. And then for the grass cover, you can see that in clear treatments at the top side, we didn't see so much good recovery. But then for the middle side and the low side, the recovery in cleared treatments was quite significant. And also for just looking at before and after, we only saw a significant increase in clear treatments in the middle side, but then the top side, we did see an increase, but then it wasn't that significant. For the low side, sorry. And then the top side, we didn't see so much change in grass cover and clear treatments. So basically in the study, what we found is that invasive rosaceae, they affect vegetation differently at different elevations. And also we saw so much differences in things like underlying root cover and temperature variations. That's why I think the recovery, it's not quite a clear straight line right now. And then also another thing that we've seen is that vegetation at low elevations accumulates much faster, like in terms of cover, compared to the top elevations. And I think one of the recommendations from this study you can make is that the management should be actually a long-term thing, because after a year, like only 12 months, you're not gonna see so much difference. But then if we give it more time, I think we can see more significant results. And yeah, I'd like to thank ARU, the whole of Rangex project, and everyone involved. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Got time for a quick question? No questions. All right, great. Okay. Honors next. Honors presenting online. Okay.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Unalina Kwate from the University of the Free State. My talk today is entitled Exploring Mechanisms Underlying the Success of Range Expanding Plants in the Maluti Drakensberg Mountains. There is emerging evidence that species are shifting their ranges along elevational gradients. This shift in species ranges results in community reassembly, which in turn leads to homogenization of plant species along elevational gradients. However, the mechanism underlying the success of range expanding species in range shifts is not well understood. It's not well understood, and as such, we thought it was prudent to determine mechanism influencing establishment success of selected succulents, grasses, shrubs, and geophytes beyond the age range. In other words, in the summit of the Drakensberg Mountains, so that we will be able to test if the variations in the success could be linked to, dispersal issues, or they are a function of, climate variability and climate change, or they could be linked to plant interactions. So in pursuit of that understanding, we established an experiment at about 3,000 meters 3,000 meters above sea level in the Drakensberg, where we had two treatments where seedlings were planted into intact vegetation, and seedlings were planted in plots where native vegetation had been removed, and these two treatments were crossed with a warming experiment using open-top chambers. So that was in the upper side. In the lower side, we simply had two treatments where seedlings were planted into intact vegetation and into plots where vegetation had been removed. So in total, we had about 60 plots in the summit of the Drakensberg, and we had 20 plots in the lower side, and we monitored temperature and volumetric soil moisture throughout the experiment. All right, so these are basically experimental sites. This is the top side with open top chambers, as well as the lower side here, and right. So after having planted the seedlings, we continuously monitored their growth by monitoring, traits related to, for instance, your height, your leaf length, and so on and so forth, so that at the end of the day we can determine plant survival over time. And we also conducted principal component analysis, as well as explored the data using generalized linear mixed model to establish establishment success of these seedlings, right? So in terms of results, we will start off with the temperature, where we are seeing that it looks like plots in the lower side, plots that where seedlings, plot that the BL plots where seedlings were planted without competition, they seem to have a relatively higher temperature than the ones that were planted with competition. However, at the upper side, things are a bit complex, where, temperature for both, the soil, the surface, as well as the air temperature are comparable across the treatments, across the ambient and the warming treatment. And this is probably due to the shielding effect of open chop chambers. In other words, the open chop chambers, they sort of decouple the plots from, ambient environment, such that processes like advection or wind channeling were sort of reduced, or did not adversely affect the sort of shielded plants in the open top chambers. So these are the temperatures. Then in terms of volumetric soil moisture, we see that generally plots that its seedlings planted without competition also relatively had higher kind of soil moisture content, and whilst in the upper part, plots that were planted where seedlings were planted into intact vegetation generally had higher sort of soil moisture content. And in terms of survival, we see very high survival during the growing season, but after winter, survival was relatively low, particularly for grasses in plots that were not warmed or were under ambient conditions. Now, during the second season, we replaced plants that had died over the previous winter. But generally, survival after winter was relatively higher than the first season. All right, as you can see, except for grasses. And by March this year, most of the grasses, survival with respect to grasses was quite low, particularly in ambient plots. But we had relatively higher survival in warmed plots. All right. So what of interest is a relatively higher survival of shrubs, and these have got very serious implications in terms of water use dynamics in this space, because if they successfully establish beyond their current range in the summit of the Drakensberg, then they are likely to alter the hydrology of the area and affect water production as an ecosystem service from the mountains. But we also tracked the seedlings that survived from the first year that is when the experiment began, up to date. So we see that we actually selected the wood species because they are quite of interest when it comes to invading the grassland. So we see very high survival in the Baglegia, as well as the Coccidia and Cotoneaster. And these have got which means the system or the grassland, our mountains are increasingly becoming vulnerable to wood species invasions. They could become really vulnerable to wood species invasion. And then we also conducted PCA, or principal component analysis, just to explore similarities among the treatments. So what we are seeing basically is that it looks like there is some bit of similarities, some grouping of treatments, similar treatments. Like here we see here in the yellow circle, we see that there is a preponderance of bare plots. In other words, these are the plots that seedlings were planted without competition from native vegetation in this area here. But diagonally opposite here, there is a preponderance of plots where seedlings were planted into intact vegetation warmed and ambient, you see. So this basically shows that there is indeed some kind of an influence of treatment, particularly plant-to-plant interaction in terms of establishment success as well as the warming side of things. All right. And then from the generalized linear mixed model, we see that a unit increase in warming, for instance, generally lead to an increase in survival of our species beyond their current range. Whilst the opposite is true with competition. So when competition increases, survival decreases. Right, a unit increase in competition will lead to reduced survival of species. So in summary, competition in cool temperatures over winter seems to have reduced plant survival, and low elevation plant species were able to establish beyond their range, an indication that such plants were dispersed and limited to breach into the alpine zone. In high elevation areas in the Maluti-Drakensberg mountains were vulnerable to low elevation range expanding plants, and therefore robust monitoring will be required to detect range shifts and deploy requisite management. Thank you.
Anna, I'll just make a couple of, thanks Anna for that. I think some of you might be interested to know what species we transplanted up onto the berg. It wasn't seedlings, it was actually mature plants. Seedlings was the term the project used as a whole, but we used mature plants. So we used native species that occur 600 meters below the alpine zone, or 3,000 meters. Things like Aloe-maculata, Cotyledon orbiculata, C4 grass like Erogostus capensis, Aristida junciformis, shrubs like Buddleia salvifolia, Leucocidia sericea. We included a couple of Pyracantha and Cotoneaster, which are non-native species, just to see what they would do. And then a set of geophytes like Diorama, Cnophophia, and Scilla. And they all had varying responses, but as Anna pointed out, the most interesting response for this workshop is that Leucocidia survived on top of the Drakensberg under warming conditions of 1.5 degrees. So that was an interesting result, and they're still there and they're looking very happy. We'll have to take them out at the end of the experiment, so that we're not actually the agents of their dispersal. And then things like Buddleia didn't do very well, so Buddleia salvifolia definitely doesn't do well even under warming higher up. And even Salvia, not Buddleia, Buddleia saligna, not saligna, what's the lauricata? That's the Drakensberg one. Even Buddleia lauricata, which grows quite high in the berg, didn't do well right on top either. So, so anyway, thanks for that, Anna. And then Steph is going to just present a little bit on the pollination camera side of things. While she comes up, just to say this is a big project. It's not possible to present all the detail now, but there is Clive, maybe when we have some time just now, just put my slide up again that shows the RangeX website. You're welcome to go and look at the website that has a lot more contextual information.
All right, thanks, Ralph. I'm a bit short. All right, so this is just some feedback on the pollination interaction. So this is task 2.3. I need the clicker. This is task 2.3 of the project that was focusing on the plant pollinator interactions and also some camera bycatch that we managed to get. So this is the Range X project. Ona has already given us some background on this. So it's a replicated field experiment that is aiming to find the drivers of elevational shifts and the impacts of these shifts. And so that's the pointy one. There we go. So we have these treatments, as Ona mentioned. So the first one, where we manipulated the environment by putting in these warming chambers that warm the environment by about 1.5 degrees. And then we manipulated the community by removing natural vegetation. And then we had combinations of open chop chamber with removed vegetation, open sun chamber with the vegetation intact. And that was at the high elevation site. And then at the low elevation site, we just had manipulated communities where we just removed the vegetation. And then this was repeated in, as Rolf showed, about a couple countries. And these were the three main sites where the pollination work has taken place. So it was in Switzerland, in Norway, and then in South Africa again. So that's our high sites at each of those countries, and then the low sites at each of those countries. So this was our high site. We placed 20 cameras at the high site. So it's the cameras on these metal stands. They're facing downwards onto the plants with their little tinfoil hats just to protect them from hail and excess water damage. We put 5 cameras on plants or on these focal plants that we planted up there, 5 on plots without focals. And then we repeated that with the OTCs. So plots without OTCs and plots with OTCs. And these plots included natural vegetation for this part of the project. Now, when you're working with plant-pollinator interactions, you need flowers because you want to see what's happening with these pollinators, because the pollinators can facilitate those shifts of plants. They'll either move them upwards, or they will also move up with the plants, or a new cohort of pollinators could take over when in the new range. Nothing flowered. Not a single one of our focal plants flowered. At the bottom site, we did 5 cameras on the low site, also on our focal vegetation, focal plants with natural vegetation, and once again, nothing flowered, which is a problem when you're looking at plant-pollinator interactions. However, life gave us lemons, we made lemonade, and we were able to look at things like phenology of natural vegetation that was bycatch from those photographs. So we'd focused on the focal species, but there were other plants that were in our frame as well. So we managed to get all this bycatch, things like duration of flowering and senescence. So this Morea specifically, it lasted for 2 days. It flowered for 2 days. So we can get that timing of flowering and duration of flowering. Temporal patterns in flowering we were able to determine. So these oxalis, we can watch them open and close on those cameras because those cameras are taking photographs every 5 minutes. So we can be accurate to within a 5-minute time frame of when that happens. And then also potential flora visitor networks. So there, looks like I photoshopped that on there. It is a real fly, I promise. So we were able to look at all sorts of pollinator networks as well. These are some of the insects you managed to record as well. So any animal record is a good record to have, especially on top of the Drakensberg, where these records are scarce. So we have some small invertebrates that we think are probably thrips or beetles, Hymenoptera, some Lepidoptera larvae, grasshoppers, he is sitting in there, and some beetles as well. And then some other more exciting records we found. I found out yesterday, it's not as exciting as we thought it was. We thought it was the first record of a mouse species in this range, or new range record for the species. Turns out it's not, but it was the first record of the smaller version of another species in the area, which then led Prof. Peter Taylor to go continue studying that and looking into that further. Then we have what is lovingly dubbed the blurred, because it's our only photo of the desert testicular. And then we have some frog records as well. And then evidence of golden moles. So we have mounds of soil that just appear in photographs. No mole, just a soil mound. This is one of the buddleias we planted. So we did try focus on the buddleia because they looked like they had the best chance of flowering. And this is one of the buddleias we planted. And when I pulled out the camera photos, As one does with cameras, you flip through the camera photos just to find the first few interesting things. And we saw all this leaf damage. You can see the leaves look like they've got holes in them. And so we got very excited because we thought we have evidence of herbivory. We found a herbivore up there. Turns out it was just hail. If you track back in the hail, in the photographs, you can see the hail. However, because my cameras are taking photos so regularly, I can tell you within a 5-minute range when that hailstorm started and how long it lasted for and how long the hail was around, the ice was there for. So that led to us using the camera traps and the bycatch from the cameras to record weather events. So we annotated in South Africa and in Switzerland, we annotated about 9,000 images of sunshine, overcast, and then snow and hail. We trained a set of images for machine learning models. And this is the work also of Dr. Jamie Allison at Aarhus University. He's the main driving force behind this. And we were able to basically generate these weather maps for the flowering season. So just to orientate you, the top two are summer, Switzerland's the top bar, South Africa's the bottom bar, and then the middle two are early autumn and the bottom two are late autumn. And so you can see sunshine patterns, snow patterns, and temperature patterns across the entire summer season or flowering season of the mountains from these cameras. So we're going to zoom into one section here. So this is South Africa in summer, and we had a very late snowfall. So you can see here the blue is the snow in the warmed plots and in the open plots. All right. And first thing we found is that the open plots, the closed plots with the chambers, the snow melts about 18 hours faster, which is probably due to that warming effect and also possibly to that shielding effect that Ona mentioned. Less snow is falling into the OTCs as well. We also have some hailstorms, which the model then did correct into snow at first. So it struggles a bit to distinguish between snow and hail, because to some of them it just looks like you can just see the white ice. But we were able to see how long snow melts and the duration of that snowfall and then the duration of snow melt, and then also sunshine and overcast days. So we can have very sunny days and then overcast days as well. So we basically have a picture of the weather over that flowering season. This was also before the weather station was installed, so this was the best measure we had of the weather over the flowering season. With the Swiss data, they were also able to correlate those periods of sunshine to bumblebee activity. So increased sunshine, increased bumblebee activity on their trifoliums that they were studying. The other thing we were able to see and confirm, which we already knew, is that the Drakensberg is characterized by very early sunshine. So we get a higher peak sunshine during the day, and then it drops in the afternoon to a more overcast. Whereas Switzerland has slightly not as high a peak, but more consistent sunshine during the day. So through this, we were able to generate both biological and meteorological data from those camera trap pictures that are then tethered in space and time. So we know what time it happened and we know exactly where it happened. It is microhabitat because it is just where the camera's focusing, but it gives you a nice picture of what's happening in that space in that time. So we could look at behavioral adaptations. So with the bumblebees, they could see what was happening with the bees in the sunshine. And there's also phenological changes and mismatches. These cameras are potentially also now a cheaper option to measure solar radiation. So we can tell when the sun is shining and when it's not shining. And then also we can now record hail and snow at very fine spatiotemporal scales as well. And then, because nothing flowered, we had another year of research to do. So we forced the situation and we moved some flower bouquets up to the top site. All right. So we went and found some hypoxia species that were about to flower, helichrysum and some trifolium. And we manually planted those up there to see what would happen at the top site and the lower site to then do comparisons between the two. That's our very first pollinator we recorded in 3 years. We were very excited. There's a tiny little insect in there. That was our first pollinator we recorded. And then also, it's not very clear, but there is actual herbivory this time. There's a grasshopper that completely devoured trifolium, and then beetles devouring the trifolium as well. These images I still need to analyze. We've just got them at the beginning of this year, so we're still working on these images. And the other thing we're focusing on, which ties in directly with the Swiss and the Norwegian sites, is working on camera surveillance of pollinators in alpine environments. So they also have Scabiosa species, so that's our Scabiosa there, and then they have a purple Scabiosa. And so we are trying to see if we can train these models to identify the invertebrates on the Scabiosa species using our camera trap images. So firstly, we want to ask, are alpine flowers visited more during the day or during the night? Is there a difference on nocturnal pollinators, more important, especially at different elevations? How do these alpine pollinators respond to warming treatments? And are pollinators dominating flowers? Do they bully others as one does or chase off another pollinator when it arrives? And we are trying to apply deep learning models to this. So this is also with Dr. Jamie Allison as well. And so some of the images we've managed to get from our Scabiosa, because we also forced the situation and planted them up top there. We have a long-tongued fly over there, some bees, that's a fly. A moth, unfortunately, we are working with a flash on quite close focal distance. So with the white flowers, we do get a bit of high exposure. But you can see there's a moth. There's a cricket. That looked like something out of District 9, looking at those photos, because it was just mandibles and legs in the dark. And then there's a butterfly as well. Okay, I think. So we also can then generate the RangeX True Crime series. This is why I love camera traps so much and the bycatch of cameras. So we have now this record of this mantis coming and completely devouring a beetle and then disappearing. And so that's just showing the value of these camera traps as well, as even though we're not actually finding what we were looking for originally with the pollinators, is we're gathering a wealth of other information through these bycatches that we have and interactions that we may not have previously been able to see. We can now see them, and this is also something that would be way more interesting to the public than a map of not dots and numbers, and this would grab their attention a lot more and would get them interested in science and what's happening in our mountains as well. So that's just a snapshot, but that's what we've been doing up with the cameras on the mountain. So thank you to everyone who's helped us drag them around and identify everything for us. So, and all our funders.
Great, thanks. And quick question for Steph.
Debbie is asking, what cameras did you use?
They are Wingscapes cameras, so they're time-lapse cameras, not motion sensor cameras set for every 5 minutes. It's just a standard Wingscapes camera.
Do you have any idea of the breeding systems of the plants? Are they selfers up there because they run out of pollinators? Or they apomix that produce seeds without being pollinated?
I'm not sure. I know at our site there's a lot of rhodohypoxis, and I know that we don't actually know how it's pollinated because there's not that many pollinators up there. Our focal species didn't flower, so I can't tell you what their pollinators are, but most likely going to be insect pollinated because that's what's abundant up there. That high up, I don't know, but I do know a lot of the plants slightly lower down do require pollinators. Sandy Steenhazen's been doing a lot of work, and it's mostly long-tongue fly pollination. There's the lizard pollination up there as well. So most of it does rely, particularly the flowering, the angiosperms do rely on pollinators.
We'll just add it to Sandy's to-do list.
Just another thing.
Definitely something that should be looked at. Yeah. Yeah, so just I think before Grant comes up, just to talk about the rosaceae problem a little bit more, is that competition of the plants we planted up there on top. Competition was much more impactful at the lower site, 2,200 meters. Things we planted there really struggled among the native vegetation. So it fits in with what William said earlier about that grassroots competition. Even if we made a hole, the stuff just didn't do well at 2,200 meters, even though it was within its elevation range. And then stuff on top actually benefited a bit from competition because it broke the cold a little bit, created a bit of a shelter, particularly those big C3 tussock grasses, created a bit of a buffer. And then the warming chambers obviously facilitated temperatures more comfortable for some of the shrubs like Leucocidia, like we mentioned. But C4 grasses, even in a warmed environment, didn't do very well on the summit. And competition, even if one excluded competition on top, it didn't compensate for the cold temperature. And then there's quite a bit of cryogenic activity that happens on the alpine summits as well. You have needle ice in the soil as late as October, early November, and starting again as early as April again. So a lot of the plants, just the roots are not possibly able to handle that coldness in the soil for that length of year. So those are things that we haven't tested those empirically, but this was a pioneer study, quite very novel in our context, and there's a lot of threads we can pull to get more empirical data on particular aspects that have come out. Anna mentioned the wind chill. The wind is a big factor up there. Obviously, if you're too tall, as William mentioned in his plenary as well, it's not in your advantage. So shrubs might also be at a disadvantage from the high winds. The Sentinel car park weather station clocked 158 kilometers an hour 2 weeks ago, which was 20 kilometers an hour more than Hurricane Beryl in the US at the same time. So we basically had a Category 2 hurricane go through the Drakensberg 2 weeks ago in terms of wind speed. So whether that's sustained wind, I'm not sure, but certainly that was the peak it hit. So that must have a massive influence on woody invasion as well when you get to those altitudes. Okay.
Sorry, can I? In
Yeah.
terms of the pollination, have you guys done any light trapping up on the peak and then looked at pollination on the insects?
So I should actually apologize that I didn't include Peter's BioBlitz in my earlier talk because we've had a BioBlitz running at Witsisuk for a few years that Peter's leading from the bottom right to the top. It's pulled out a whole lot of new invertebrate species, but I don't think there's been light trapping yet. I'm sure a moth light trap would pull out about 20 new species in a week with moths, but no, not yet. No.
Ralph? Oh yeah, Bridget. I think also Cindy, she has a student at VETS who's been doing collections there and seen the pollination network and everything.
Yeah.
So maybe I think once she gets her data out there, you'll get an idea of the pollination network we have there. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's it. Grant, do you want to come up? While Grant comes up, do you want to do your talk? Okay. Do you want to give a quick overview? And then we're going to go into, after that, we'll go into discussions.
Sorry, it's me again. So I'm going to give just a quick update on invasive rosaceae. It's said in Southern Africa, but I'm just going to, got too big, so I'm just going to do in the Eastern Great Escarpment, sort of Drakensberg. This is work of a whole bunch of students and Sandy and other collaborators. And I wish I could share it all with you. Some of it's been truly fascinating. We've done a lot of ecological stuff that I won't have time to present today. And some of it's, in my opinion, a little bit scary. So invasive species. So we got a lot of problems with invasive species in South Africa. We have more invasive trees than any other country on earth. And these invasive shrubs and trees make up a large percentage of the invasive flora that's impacting South Africa, and just the sheer volume of those has significant economic and environmental impacts. The example I give there is just the water use. We all know that. We struggle with water in South Africa, and these plants are using a huge amount of it, and it affects our GDP. And of these invasive species that I'm badgering on about, a lot of them are really well known, and it's received a huge amount of attention, mainly down in the Western Cape, the pines, the wattles, the eucalypts, salix species and poplars. But something that, in my opinion, that's received very little attention is invasive rosaceae, and in my opinion are becoming one of the most severe invasive, surpassing all the other big ones we've historically worked on. And we're getting more and more environments, especially where I'm from, that look like this. Something that should be grassland is becoming northern temperate weed dominant. Pines and poplars are in there, but on the whole, it's just a red sea of different species of invasive rosaceae species. And very interesting for me was how these things are sort of invading as a complex. If we look here, there's these orange pyracantha, these red cotoneaster, leucocidias in there, and if you go and jump inside, you'll find rosa, as well as a number of bramble species. And then they're not forming a monoculture, they're forming a complex of different species. So how's it working? And we've done a bit of work into showing some are being dispersed by birds, while others by mammals. Some of their flowering times are a month apart, which allows them both to get pollinated. And so it's a huge amount to unwind there about how it's happening, but I won't get into that. What I want to get into is what's driving them and what's driving this invasion. Just a bit more information on the main ones quick. We've got the two pyracantha species, and these are two that have different flowering times by about a month, which I think allows them both to get these incredible number of berries pollinated and into the environment. Then there's cotoneaster, Rosa rubiginosa, and then, as Peter presented this morning, leucocidia, which is different, doesn't have red fruits. It's got these really small wind-dispersed fruits, seeds that are spreading in the environment. And some pictures. So this is what, when I'm talking about it's invading as a complex, you can see the green is leucocidia, but in here there's red pyracantha going up the valleys. And this isn't an exceptional photo. It's literally every valley in the Eastern Free State at the moment looks a bit like that. I've been doing some work on changing and NDVI, and if we look at areas, it's not that clear, but here's this same thing, red berries in there and green, and so that should be grassland, and instead we're getting this real complex in both the valleys and on the slopes. And so this is a change in vegetation in quite a big chunk of the Eastern Free State, and blue is where it stayed the same since 1984, and anything that's white and red is effectively what's changed from a grassland into more of a acacia environment in the Eastern Free State. The red is where it's significant, but the white is no longer grassland. And that's been ground truth with sort of images like this, where these can come out red and white. So we're looking, some of the things we looked at is what's driving it. So we've had students doing some really mundane work of going to these invasions, selecting out a shrub and manually counting berries. And then using a very fancy mathematical models, trying to extrapolate them into how many berries are being produced per meter of invasion, and the answer is a lot. The conclusion after a lot of work is there's just so many it's not worth counting. So if we look at pyracantha, if we got a 3-meter shrub, we're at about 10 to 15 million seeds per square meter going into the environment. And then so pyracantha doesn't last too long in the soils, but we're at 400,000 seeds of cotoneaster per shrub going into the environment, lasting 2 years. And Rosa, we still have seeds buried, but we're at 2 years, and so they got a longer seed bank. So it's just millions and millions and millions of seeds being produced by these shrubs getting spread into the environment. The problem is they're also being produced. No, wait, that one moves. The grassland biome is an incredibly harsh place in winter. It's very cold and there was never much food. Suddenly there's a huge amount of food in this biome that was never there, and everything's taking advantage of it. So they are really, really extensively eaten by everything, rodents, birds, large mammals, small mammals. And so we were looking at the different things that have eaten them and spread them, and it goes from we've had shrews come in, which seems odd, shrews coming in to eland. So everything's in there. We had a look at if that facilitates them, if things passing through gut passages, if these rosaceae are facilitated by passing through the different gut passages. Donald, who's right here in the front, has done some of this work, but we've done it with a variety. He did it with pyracantha first, and so we took these berries, fed them to birds to see if it facilitated germination. And if the fruit just falls to the ground, we get this very low germination of the seeds. However, if you pass it through over any sort of bird, you get this massive facilitation. So if it passes through a bird, it's going to grow. Whereas interestingly, Cataniasta is quite different. If it stays as a whole fruit, it's got more chance of growing into a tree compared to if it's passed through a bird. And one of the things we've shown is this one's preferentially eaten by rodents, but we haven't tested what happens if it goes through a rodent's gut yet. It's a much bigger seed compared to pyracantha. So we think this one is intentionally bird dispersed, whereas they'll get eaten by birds, but I think the facilitation is from rodents or just like landing below the mother plant and growing from there. Then larger animals, we've got baboons, elands, goats, verse, depulped and whole seeds. And we got Cataniasta and pyracantha and rosa, and then this is a native, similar species. And the take home is if it's the top one is eland, and then that one's baboon. So if it passes through a large mammal, it's also facilitating it. The difference between a large mammal and the birds is the distance, the time in the gut. Within birds, it's usually in and out the system within a couple of minutes, very rarely over half an hour, so it's a short dispersal. But we're collecting eland dung kilometers from the closest invasive rosaceae stand, and there are viable seeds in the dung and pushing up higher and higher into our mountains. So that's definitely something that's driving the invasion. Just for fun, we also saw what the humans were doing, and the humans are eating them too, and they're quite tart, to be honest. They're not particularly nice. They're pyracantha, but a lot of people eat them. And then this is also what Donald was doing. And then we asked what they did with them, swallowed them, crushed them. And I think very much when you drive along the roadways just outside of towns, you can see it, especially pyracantha, sort of eating the road verges coming up. And I think that's very much kids walking to school, break off a branch and eat the berries and then spit out the seeds. So we are also contributing to the problem. The impacts, which I'm not really going to get into, but that's last week. That's my home in Clarence in the Free State, and that's a fire coming over the hill. So definitely in the Clarence area, that used to be a grassland biome. The whole management of fires has always been this grassland biome, and now we're a savanna. And it hasn't really hit home yet, so we've never really lost any houses in the valley, but last year some houses burnt, and then this year, this fire 2 weeks ago, burnt down 5 homes just in the valley. And that's because there's no access anymore because the thickets are so dense of these invasive rosaceae. The firefighters can't get in, and the heat's higher. It's a difference. Like the guys who live in the fynbos know the fires are different. Well, they're more severe, and we're not prepped for it yet. But we've looked at biodiversity, the impacts on biodiversity of these as a complex with Lesejo's work. Interesting, we've been looking at the soils. We've done 2 studies now looking at soils underneath these invasive rosaceae compared to paired plots next door in open grassland. And there's significant changes in the soils. And I'm not sure what to relate it to yet, but there's definitely changes in the soils. Dave did some work on it with water. We did a very interesting study on nurse plants showing that the thorny invasive rosaceae are very much facilitating other alien invasives, whereas Leucocidia wasn't. Leucocidia was sort of acting as a natural grassland, where as soon as there were thorns involved, there was this sort of accumulation of other alien species. And Donald investigated this problem of access, where they're forming just such dense thickets. It's becoming quite problematic for a number of areas where I think we discussed it's too expensive to clear, and so the land is not worth clearing anymore, and then it just becomes thicker and thicker. So where do we go? It's not great news. I mean, there's a rapid spread, and with mammals and birds spreading them, they're going not just downwards with gravity, they're going upwards and into some very difficult environments, making management incredibly hard. In the Eastern Free State, we don't have, I wouldn't call it the luxury, but we don't have high altitude clearing teams. We actually have very little working for water programs working on any of these invasive rosaceae. Some working ecosystems, clearing Leucocidia, but on the whole, things like pyracantha are just getting ignored. We had started developing a biocontrol program on it, but funding was pulled by DFFE. And so far, we've only had one study that Lesego presented on that looked into management options, and as good as it was, it's one study, so we don't know if other methods are going to be more proactive. We also used what is universally known as the best method for their control, where we stumped the invasive rosaceae, and we got quite a severe warning from the Department of Environmental Affairs that that was illegal because there are no registered herbicides for them. And so I'm not sure where you go if you can't control them with the best management method. So we're doing one study at the moment where we're working with some students in Belgium, looking at some drone technology where in these very brown winter environments, these things glow red. The limitations on using AI technology with identifying and spraying usually is there's a processing time where the thing spots it has to calculate what it is before it knows what to spray. But if it's clear as day where it's red or brown, then the processing time really speeds up. So there is a chance we're going to be able to use some drone technology in these high mountain catchments where it's very difficult to get up and try and control these things in high up, where they can just see red berries and spray. But again, there's going to be some issues with herbicide permissions to spray herbicides. And yeah, thank you.
Any questions for Grant? Right.
Thanks, Grant. You said that this has potential for biological control. Is it a good candidate, and are there any other control efforts against them in other parts of the world?
Not biocontrol options. They are definitely in America. They've managed them with herbicides and mechanical clearing, and as well as in Australia. But biocontrol, we had a MOU signed with universities in China who were looking at associated insects, and I hadn't been across and seen them, but they suggested they had some decent flower galling insects and things. Yeah.
We must get on to the new minister.
Oh, we wrote him an email last week already, but no reply yet.
We can talk about it.
All right. A last question for Grant. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Grant, for the insightful study.
My question might be slightly different to what you were talking about, but it stems from the fact that you have showed that lots of birds and other animals, but my interest is on birds because since these are prolific fruit producers, do you perhaps know in literature or from other studies whether the abundance of fruits does lead perhaps to an increased population of birds in in the invaded area?
Yeah, we have a PhD student investigating ecosystem changes like, at a big level at the moment, and she's looking at birds. I think it's pretty clear already it's attracted a lot of frugivorous birds that were never there in winter. So there's been a change in range of species that would move back down elevations in winter, now can stay in the grassland all through the winter. And some species, like olive pigeons, that were never present are now very abundant. So they're changing. Interestingly, for me, one of the things that we currently with Peter is investigating the changes in rodent populations, because now there's abundance of food. They're potentially going to be able to breed in winter when they could never have bred in winter. And so there's higher rodent densities in these invasive populations. And so the next thing for me to check is, does that relate to small hawks and predatory bird numbers also building up? Which I don't know if it's nice or not. It's a change in ecosystem. And it goes all the way up into higher mammals because we're no longer grassland, we're more of a savanna. Things like warthogs and bush pig and bushbuck and lots of different things that would never have been in the grassland biome are also showing up in these invasive stands.
All right, so thanks, Grant. That was great. Thanks everyone who spoke. So we've got yeah. So now that we know we're all gonna die from maybe Grant, those big fires in Clarence will just reset the rodent population as well. You know, so maybe they'll just get fried. So a boom bust scenario.